Thank you. Thanks for having me in such a prodigious set of fellows experts. And again, congratulations for the book. I think it's quite an accomplishment. I start by saying that I find presumptuous to present that I will not necessarily critique the book, nor I am a critic. I have started the book in December and then left to Dakar expecting to be back before the end of the year. So I'm stuck here without the book, left in my office in Montreal. And luckily, Christine kindly recently sent me the draft so I could at least complete my reading, which I have done poorly, I have admit, and in a rush. So I'm quite sorry. And also quite sorry to send greetings from Dakar, where I'm shy to say I'm enjoying winter. We have 25 degrees here. So, well, I believe it is timely in the global crisis situation to have such a refreshing book that reinvigorates dinosaurs like myself, and an opportunity for younger generations of progressive scholars to have a critical synthesis. Despite its title, this is not a book of anticipation nor a book of perspective, but a kind of non-Eurocentric anthology of approaches to draw the nature and plausible trajectory of the really existing capitalism, with an original emphasis on perception of the global South. I wonder what if the book could have been Capitalism and His Certain Future. Not to say that it is possible that capitalism will run for other centuries, particularly on how China will behave in the next 30 and 40 years if we don't have a war. But the conception, and I think I really endorse what Nancy have said, the conception of the future of capitalism depends on how one reads it. Of course, the humility that humans lack prevents them from understanding the arrogance of the Capitalocene era. I rather say Capitalocene than Anthropocene, but the social reproduction of capitalism will continue at the expense of the social relations, on the expenses of the environment and the living. But the fact of having wanted to give such a vast panorama of capitalism and its possible trajectory with so many authors and their views could have resulted in a work of probably more pages. I'm not sure even 1,000 would be enough for a reference theory book. So it was a major achievement to squeeze that in such a book. It is also an intergenerational effort, an attempt to reconcile, and sometimes the pairing of authors is quite original, even if it may pose some epistemological problem of heterogeneity. The effort to be concise, make it easy to read, and to synthesize it, I think was probably a big among efforts of task, and I'm sure they have spent hours doing this, and this effort should be commended. But the effort to try to be so vast without being holistic leads, however, to the impression that there would be a palette of critical visions of capitalism, particularly its reading from the global South. This is new, I must admit, in the Western academic hemisphere, and I applaud to it, even if the subjectivity of the selection can always be questioned. In one hand, I find it difficult to understand the reason for the postmodern incursion, whose cynicism and political correctness I perceive. On the other hand, from the point of view of the grids of world system and neo-Marxism, the effort of popularization and synthesis seems to me formidable. On the other hand, it has given rise to remarks that I would like to share, because I remain kind of hungry for more of these dimensions. Either capitalism is something that is rooted to a longer period, and we really have to focus on the roots of the capitalist system to better understand it, so to have a glimpse of what is at stake in the near future, then the world system is a totality that has historically benefited from several juxtaposed phases throughout the ages, going back probably to 7,000 years. One can already anthropologically contest the arbitrariness of the globalized dating and object that from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, there was indeed globalization of the human race and its cultural and production practices like tools, fire, habits, and custom, and so on. And still, this diffusionism at the end of the Neolithic period from the centers of sedentarization and transhumance, auguring a certain stabilization of the way of life, works, and production, prepares in a way the globalizing odyssey. So the spaces of Afro-Eurasian world system, as illustrated by Frank and Gills, would fertilize the advent of capitalism. According to these authors, since this era, polarization exists and would literally be the law of history. Here, the fundamental question is of knowing whether this history of 5,000 known polarization in an inherent way, or whether the later only really occurs with capitalism, which makes it fundamental characteristic. We may see in a few minutes, I propose reading between the lines important nuances in the world system grid between the divergent grid of Samir Amin, Wallerstein, Frank, Gills, Arrighi. Frank and Gills, for example, with the world system theory grid, have demonstrated that the theory of the world system makes an important contribution to the renewal of the world system grid, but it is at odds with the conception of the polarization characteristic of capitalism that Samir Amin supports. Frank and Gills argues, on the contrary, that capital as a form of social relation has been present and played a significant role since antiquity. It emphasizes its decisive, even central, role in shaping and expanding the world system over a period of several millennia and across the globe, not just in Europe, but in the past 5 centuries. I, however, share with Samir Amin the view that you can see this in, I think, some of the part of the articles, that polarization seen from the periphery, it manifests itself in dependence. This is a fact, that polarization is inherent to capitalism. And this point of view is not that of bourgeois ideologies, obviously, but this polarization that is inherent to capitalism, even through the analysis of the mechanism of polarization, leave the field open to fertile debates. And I think the book give mirrors effect by pairing and giving different point of view. The third thing is that polarization inherent to capitalism began in the mercantilist period, unfold with the Industrial Revolution, takes its contemporary form with imperialism in the Leninist sense. And I think the article the chapter really explore and show that, and perhaps is engaged in a new stage of its deepening, that consequently the people of the periphery can only free themselves from its disastrous effect by breaking with the logic of integration into the world capitalist system, which is basically disconnecting, delinking, and thereby with the social logic of capitalism altogether, engaging in a long transition to socialism. And I think this is maybe the only critique on the very end of the book, the lack of options and the lack of alternative, and how the future of capitalism could be in a way. And that disconnection and the progressive construction towards socialism constitute projects that can only unfold within the framework of either a revolutionary state, at least a progressive state. My sense is that most of these authors have been trapped into the modern grid of development, what the German called Entwicklung. I always question what was development before it was conceptualized. And it was just around biology in 1750 that Justice Moser started applying this on social change and so on. But the fortune of the term and the way it has spread have created a phenomenon which I think is not capitalism, but that's the way we portray it in the book. And I think we have to reflect whether this is really capitalism or not. I have coined a strange word, which is megalo-ensemble, which is indeed a gray zone where liberties are in gestation, the coloniality, the property. So basically what I'm trying to say is the modernity and the way we perceive capitalism from the European lenses and from the lenses of development make this megalo ensemble as a Trojan horse to describe the excessive and presumptuous overestimation of the aura, the phase that actually control, you know, the faith and the future of what we perceive as capitalism. But I think the monster that is actually expanding with the effect of the neoliberal era, I'm not even sure it is capitalism anymore. But anyway, I have the sense that at least we can see a globalized economy capable of integrating the heterogeneity of political system in a great attractor effect, whose radial character integrates the periphery towards the center, and the very conditional adjustments that nevertheless keep them at a maintained distance that the imperialist asymmetry prevents them from overcoming. The second thing not enough explored is the nature of the nation state, but the globalization of the nation state and its cross-border territoriality is variance of democracy, and with it the process of institutionalization and the law themselves have created new forms of hegemony of the states that has to cope with his own downsizing and the disengagement of the state from the liberalization of the rest of the economy. So that created also a very hybrid type of state, which is no longer necessarily in charge of capitalism, but has to cope with it. And the market itself, said to be self-regulated, which is superimposed on similar existing realities. Here we always have a confusion maintained in the dominant discourse, and sometimes even in Marxist writing, between the concept of market economy and that of capitalism, which is the source of a very dangerous weakening of the criticism addressed to the policies implemented. The market, which refer by nature to competition, is not capitalism, whose content is precisely defined by the limits to competition that the monopoly of private property, including oligopolistic property, implies. The market and capitalism are two distinct concepts. Capitalism that really exists is the very opposite of what the imaginary market is. Moreover, capitalism, considered abstractly as a mode of production, is based on an integrated market of at least three dimensions: market for social labor product, capital market, and labor market. And as you know, only the first two dimensions are really integrated, and the constitution of a real world labor market is always excluded or selectively used by the state political frontiers. For these reasons, the really existing capitalism is necessarily polarizing on a global scale, and then unequal development it found becomes the most violent growing contradiction that cannot be overcome within the logic of capitalism. And this gives such an importance for such a book, because at least we have tools to understand the complexity and the layers for anybody, you know, as just to revise our own theory. And this is a major achievement, but we have to think of this new generation who are discovering these scholars, discovering these theories, and you now have at least a tool to lead them in the complexity of this world. As you know, after the Paris Agreement target of no more than 1.5 degrees of temperature rise and a cap of 1.5 degrees is likely to prove insufficient, as evident by the state of coral reefs like in the Arctic or sea level rise. Other amplifying effects such as our pollution, waste, overexploitation of resources, conflicts and epidemic are far from fading. So apocalyptic scenarios are no longer science fiction, and the urgency to drastically correct our mode of production and consumption is more than actual. There is still time to redefine our unbalanced relationship with the living and save our species. And the signals are moreover evident in the COVID pandemic. You know, here almost no one is wearing a mask, and it's kind of strange to be around and to see how people are behaving. But this is the reality of a polarized world. You have people who have no means to be vaccinated, they don't believe into medicine, and they have such an immune system that allows them to cope with the pandemic, and the population is young. And you wonder, I left Montreal in a curfew. So it has shown, all this pandemic has shown the vulnerability of the human race and our scientific complacency and inadequacy. It has also shown us that it is possible to reduce our pollution and our frenetic development. It showed us how indispensable are the lowest paid of our employees, without whom our system does not work. The wealthiest elite, I have heard these days, some very wealthy people agree to pay taxes, but the wealthiest elite have curled up in their privilege more than ever. So the world economy has faltered and has been rescued mainly in the private sector, once again by the public spending and services. So the violence of the state and its control on citizen life have increased. Structural violence has illustrated the unworthy socioeconomic gaps in health system, in access to care and vaccines. Quarantines and barrier measures have better revealed individualism and the importance of gregarious and human bonds, and helped to reinvent mechanism of solidarity. So with the attention and diversion of the pandemic, the erosion of democratic values, the decay of political system, the accentuation of populism and culturalism with millenarian and racist overtone have become normal in many places, particularly in Europe or in the United States. So this really, I find, is highlighted in ways by the trajectory that the book is highlighting. And with employment and technology progress, the lumpen proletariat is more marginalized than ever. And with this, the most vulnerable peasant, and they no longer seem to be even a useful reserve army for capital, being reduced to a subhuman precariat. So accumulation, once based partly on production, is inexorably tilting towards dispossession, financialization, destruction, and technological control. It is, however, necessary with such a book to grasp this transition towards barbarism and anomie in the long term, and to influence by a daring and internationalist humanistic political leap. And I think this is, in a way, the strength of such a book, because once you have finished reading, you're kind of, I must say, kind of doped, supported in your internationalist humanist leap. And perhaps we need such a book, and maybe another book, but devoted just on alternatives to capitalism. I prefer progressive options, not necessarily alternative. Alternative, you always have something in front, but progressive option for the future. And I trust the authors can produce that second book. So again, congratulations, and sorry for having been so long.